What's up, everybody? I'm Josh Meek, the Uber Geek. Welcome to Pretty Dece, your daily entertainment and pop culture show. Today on the show, we're going to talk about a big happening in the world of competitive video gaming. Video game high score holder and hot sauce magnate Billy Mitchell has been stripped of all of his high scores, and he's been banned from even submitting new scores to Twin Galaxies, the world's largest tracker of video game world records. Now, if you haven't seen the documentary King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, I highly recommend it. It's a documentary that follows Steve Wiebe, who is a gamer trying to set a world record on the arcade version of Donkey Kong, and the documentary paints Billy Mitchell as kind of a villain. He's the kind of world record holder at the time, and he's kind of painted as this sort of slimy guy always trying to get ahead, while Steve Wiebe is the, of course, hero of the documentary. That documentary came out 10 years ago, so for 10 years, the general populace has kind of not been a huge fan of Billy Mitchell, so justice from that documentary is kind of being served right now. So what actually happened to get up to this point, to actually have Billy Mitchell stripped of his scores and banned? What did he do? Like, what in the world happened? So, turns out back in February of this year, a complaint was submitted to Twin Galaxies. It purported that Billy Mitchell had not used actual arcade hardware when he set his high scores, and that, of course, is a requirement of Twin Galaxies. You have to set the scores on the original arcade hardware, but instead, Billy Mitchell had used MAME, which is the Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. Basically, he'd used an emulated version of the game instead of the real deal. Now, MAME does strive to be as accurate as possible to the original playing of the game, but no matter how hard they try, it's still not legit. There are still going to be inconsistencies in how MAME plays, in the speed at which the game moves, and in tiny little details that the average player might not notice, but someone who is trying to set a high score might gain a slight advantage from. And of course, you know, that's just if you are being completely legit just using a MAME copy. Of course, MAME and just being on the PC in general makes it much, much easier to cheat on the game. You can have software to assist you, you can modify the code of the original Donkey Kong game, and do all kinds of things that can boost your score. That's why Twin Galaxies rules it out entirely and focuses just on the original arcade hardware. Now, this investigation has been going on since February, and it's been quite the ordeal. Twin Galaxies, doesn't really do anything super fast, and they've been striving for the truth, as they say. And the investigation has taken so long because these scores that Billy Mitchell set were submitted via videotape. So there's original tape of Billy Mitchell playing Donkey Kong to set his high scores. There's actually 3 separate tapes that have been called into question. After examining these tapes, it was found that original unmodified Donkey Kong hardware was incapable of producing the specific board transitions that were demonstrated in those videos. So, aka, the screens that they're seeing on the video aren't reproducible in the actual game. It's not something that the actual game hardware can do. So, in essence, Billy Mitchell cheated to set these high scores. And again, even if he didn't intend to cheat, even if he was expecting to play an exact copy of Donkey Kong, he just didn't have the arcade hardware laying around, he misled Twin Galaxies and, intended to represent himself incorrectly. And on the dark side of it, he could have been playing on MAME as a way to boost his score. We have no idea what modifications had been made to the game, what assists he had running as he was playing. It calls his entire integrity into question as it goes on setting this score. So because of that lying and dishonesty, they not only erased those Donkey Kong scores from their history, they banned him entirely. He can no longer submit scores at all. So in a way, this is justice for Steve Wiebe from the King of Kong documentary. Wiebe is now recognized as the first person in history to break 1 million points on Donkey Kong. Previously, that was thought to be Billy Mitchell until these scores were erased. So 10 years after the release of King of Kong, we're seeing kind of this beautiful ending to the story presented in that documentary. It's a really cool follow-up to the story in that film. However, this seems like a massive shakeup, but it doesn't really shake up the record books over at Twin Galaxy quite as much as you might expect. You see, Wiebe and Mitchell weren't on the top of the leaderboards anymore. A lot's changed in the past 10 years as it comes to Donkey Kong scores. The current record is held by one Robbie Lakeman, and Wiebe and Mitchell were somewhere around the 12th position. So they've been knocked out by quite a few individuals since the focus of the documentary King of Kong. Nonetheless, very cool for Steve Wiebe, and probably a pretty big bummer right now for Billy Mitchell himself. So that's going to do it for Pretty Dece for today. Thank you very much for joining me here on the show. Like Pretty Dece on Facebook at facebook.com/PrettyDeceShow, and follow me on Twitter at PrettyDeceShow. And finally, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can find that at PrettyDeceShow.com/video. So check out the YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, and like me in the Anchor app so you never miss any of the content.